Okay, Kevin, well, we'll start at the obvious place, a little bit about who you are, HH Global, what you do, but most importantly, how this all fits into the sustainability practice and strategies. How does that fit together?
Thanks, Neil. So I'm Kevin Dunckley, Chief Sustainability Officer at HH Global, and we're the world's leading marketing activation business. And what that means is we bring our mainly Fortune 500, but big client brands, retail, pharma, tech, life science, etc. We bring their big marketing campaigns to life globally across things like luxury packaging, point of sale, in-store environments for people like Nike and Adidas. So a range of materials, substrates, and we do that in a very sustainable way at scale.
Now, how you do that in a sustainable way, that's the big question, the conscious creative. Talk me through that whole program. What is it? How did you come up with that? How does that actually work in practice? Because often you think about point of sale, you're thinking about glitzy, glossy, expensive looking things. People expect quality, but people expect things to be sustainable. Talk me through that program.
I mean, the eureka moment for us was we spent a lot of time focusing on clients and carbon footprint and supply chain and carbon footprint, so those distinct stakeholder groups. And we have 500 plus creative and design people across the world, like 26 studios, doing a range of different things with physical and digital. But let's just focus on physical materials. So we're talking glass, woods, cardboards, plastics, metals, a wide range of materials. And in 2023, we were inspired by a couple of outside conversations. Have we really focused enough on the designers and creatives and made them aware of sustainability and how they have a lot of power at that early stage of the journey? When a product brief comes in, and it'll be a client brief around a particular activation or a brand launch, are they thinking right at that moment about the concept only, or are they thinking about the materials, the emissions, the recyclability, the reusability? Are they thinking about what happens to this beautiful thing they're designing at the end of its life? And I think we came to the conclusion they weren't. And so what if we could? The contention was, what if those 500 creative innovators, they're coming up with ideas from a blank page with a brief, what if we got them excited about sustainability? Some of them might already be there, but what if they weren't all there? What could then be the outcome? What kind of design would you have if they're looking at it through that lens? So that was the spark of, why didn't we think of this before? So we thought, let's put a program together that helps that community, creatives and designers. And I learned they're very different groups. You don't call a designer a creative and you don't call a creative a designer. Didn't know that before. What if we found out where they all were, educated them and then gave them tools? So that was how that started. We'd have better design outcomes.
But as you say there, at the time, they weren't. That, by its very nature, suggests challenges in creating a culture of change. What were the challenges in actually making that change? Because I guess there's the factor of, well, we've always done it like this. I've always used this supply. I've always done this. How do you get around those challenges?
It's a good question, because we were dealing with people who were doing, some are cardboard engineers, some are using glass and metal, some are using wood. We're in different countries. You've got different nuances culturally. You've got, in a way, you're stepping into their world and saying, everything you've ever done and earned your living doing, we think there might be a better way. So you've got to be very, almost diplomatic about it. The good news was there was we put an early steering group together. There was a lot of energy and passion behind this. We had people saying, I'd like to be involved in this from the packaging side. I'd like to be involved from the in-store environment. So we almost formed this eclectic group that was international, who wanted to be in the room. We weren't upsetting them by saying you could do it better. And we ended up creating something almost by the designers, for the designers, and by the creatives, all with sustainability at its core. But I was kicking myself in that we focused so much on suppliers and clients. We had this big group of people we'd almost left and assumed they know what they're doing from a circular design and a sustainability perspective, and that was a mistake.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, which I'm allowed to do. I'm the host. That's part of the job. Talk me through a case study of a particular success story. You don't have to name names if you don't want to, but where you've seen a situation where say the design or the packaging or the point of sale wasn't sustainable. There was a problem, and you've solved that. Can you pick one out where there's been a real solution?
I'll probably, before I just pick the example, I'll just explain the components of the program, because people have said, is it a program? Is it a platform? We kind of think of it as a way of thinking. So we're trying to make the design and creative community sit up and go, there is a different way of thinking about this. Whatever they're designing, it applies to everything. So we kind of have an education, a series of, I deliberately didn't say training there, education, raising awareness of circular economy, circular design thinking, innovation. These aren't new constructs, but we wanted to develop some education around that, and it didn't exist. So we had to make that and create that with third-party people, and then give people tools to measure whether they were applying what they just learned. So part of that is alternative materials, so a digital platform that had those, and there's quite a clever story of how we did that if we get to that, and then a scorecard in metric. Now, one of my team is in the audience helped to develop that, but it was not only the carbon footprint of the material or the product, it would also, where are you designing, what country, which country is it going to be deployed in, do you know how it's going to be transported, what happens to it at the end of its life, can it be reused, or is it going to be cycled, or worst case, that's going to landfill, we want to avoid that. And we came up with a simple A, B, C, D, E metric, and that's important because you can show people a way of doing things, but how do you know if it's working? You need some metrics. So it's quite a complex set of calculations that ends up being an A, B, C, D, E, which again was risky because designers now got to go, I'm marking my own work here. But that's the whole point. We want you to mark your work and go, I'm consistently getting a D or a C. How do I move that up to a B or a C? With that in mind, we had the first client, a kind of anchor client in the beverages industry saying, we have our own studio. We think we know where they're at, not where they wanted them to be. So they did the education modules and then set a KPI that every single one of their designs from 1st of Jan this year had to be no lower than a C. And when we retrospectively scored, the baseline was like C's and D's. So they were designing in an okay way. I'm not naming them. They were C's and D's, and they've said, now we can measure design. Let's try and set a KPI as a minimum of a C. And that's carbon emissions, single materials, transport, end of life, all of those things rolled up into a C. So they've got a nice metric now to see whether they're performing to their own KPI. This was their studio, not our people. We designed it initially for our people. So that one we were really pleased with because that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted designers and creatives to be having that conversation with the client and saying, I've got two alternatives for you. There's a C and there's a B. Talk me through the difference, and them to have that conversation. We're not even in the room. We don't need to be there. These are the creatives. So that was really pleasing. We're now trying to roll it out across all of our business. It's tough, but we're rolling it out.
Absolutely. Let's move on to a bit of advice, really, because I'm sure there's probably plenty of people watching on the stream or in the room today. Maybe the creative side of the business isn't an area that has got as much sustainability attention. It's, as you've discussed, it was an area that was potentially getting left out. What's your advice to them? What steps can be taken to try and have that revolution within that particular area?
I think the key thing, and I wouldn't say we came up with it, I think it kind of formed, was to almost make it their idea, make them own the project. So we had a small project group, which I talked about a moment ago, and they almost ran with it. Once we had the initial idea about, we're going to give you some tools, we're going to help you, educate you on sustainability, who's had some before, some had, some hadn't. But they kind of owned it, and you had people designing for the fashion clients, some for the sportswear clients, some for the drinks clients. So it was quite nice to watch this group of different design disciplines using different materials in different parts of the world come together, and you could hear them saying, well, what we could do is this, and then we could add that, and what if the system did that, and what if the scorecard did that? Our team were involved, but we were playing a more backseat role, because if they're going to adopt it, they need to kind of own it as their idea, and it's now moved on to, I'm not really involved, my team aren't as involved. They've kind of owned it. So that was great to see. So get people who are going to use whatever it is you're rolling out to be in the room and shaping it with you, because they feel a sense of ownership.
Yeah, that buy-in's essential. There's plenty more I could talk to you about, but I'm conscious I want to make sure I get to any questions. Do we have any immediate questions from the room? Do we have any? Oh, is that one at the back? Yes, it is. For anyone who was in the room yesterday, I did promise I'd fall up these stairs at least once. It hasn't happened yet, but we will look forward to that. Where was the hand at the back? Here we go.
Hello, Kevin. By educating the designers, are you taking the choice to be more sustainable away from the client, therefore only giving them a sustainable choice in your solutions? Or are you still giving them the alternative as standard design or new sustainable designs, or are you just completely taking that away from their choice?
No, I mean, the client is king, as the saying says, so they'll have a brief, they'll have a budget, they'll have a way of doing things, so you have to be respectful of that, and you're politely challenging them by giving them an alternative. That's the dream, and we don't believe that, in 10 projects, 10 are going to suddenly turn to this new world we'd like to see. But if 1 in 10 or 2 in 10, And if the client's kind of learning and saying, oh, actually, if we use mono material rather than two materials, don't use glues and rivets, don't use laminates where we don't need to. And if you consciously, that's where the name came of, you start thinking about what you're designing with the end in mind, reusability, not recyclability should be the last thing we end up with. That is not the target here. It's about designing better, using better materials to last longer, to be modular, to be flat pack when it's in transit. The clients are kind of coming on that journey, but if they say, I still want what I've always had, we can't argue with that. They're in charge here, but we're finding clients saying, this is interesting. Maybe on the next project, we'll revisit that when we've got a bit more time. Because the constraints are time, budget, we all recognise that in this room. This is needed by Friday, come what may. Come back with your innovation later when we've got more time. That's a common conversation. Or I just don't have the budget for this. And I want to put to bed the myth of, because you might lead on to sustainability has to cost more. It doesn't. That's a myth. If it's costing you more, you're doing it wrong. New materials, potentially, they might cost more until they scale, but sustainability is about being more efficient, it's about being more resourceful, it's about designing something that can have more longevity. And I think we all agree that that's what we want. So if you could get the design community engaged and the client in that conversation, the hope is you tip some of those conversations into doing it a slightly different way, and that becomes a bit of a movement.
Thank you, Kevin. Anything else from the room? What? Oh, I've got time for one more. I think that was the next hand there.
Hi, thanks so much. I was wondering if there was any collaboration with experts in each of these fields when establishing the scorecards, and whether or not there are now design industry standards for these sustainable scorecards, or if that's an opportunity that exists.
I'll answer the second bit. Great question. The second part, we'd love that to be a standard, that they don't exist really. And to your first part about experts, absolutely. I mean, it's a common theme in sustainability projects. No one company has all the answers. So we work with a sustainability consultancy, a company called Inspire Circular, who work closely with IKEA, real experts on circular materiality. I mean, if you're standing up, for example, if you're standing up alternatives in a platform to materials, you better avoid greenwash. It better be authentic information. Other materials that have the same properties are. So we kind of used a third party. We used a bit of AI to get a sort of template developed. What would you need to know about each material? We then put it through 2 lots of peer review with third parties, because we don't have all the answers and we're not pretending we do. And I think that adds to the authenticity of what we're doing, is that we've got credible third parties who are working with the likes of IKEA, who are materials experts, circular economy experts, are helping us to create the information and the data for the designers. And even with the education modules, we went out and thought, we'll buy some off the shelf. They don't exist. You go Googling circular design education, there's a lack of courses, there's a lack of information out there. So we had to build it, and it takes longer and it costs more. So standards would be our dream. We've had a few universities saying we'd love to add this to the curriculum. There's one in the US, one in LATAM, and we've had a couple of conversations here where there's definitely a need for this. And I'm not saying we're the silver bullet, but we're definitely on a journey to having some of the answers here. So good question, I hope I answered it.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions to the room. Sorry I couldn't get to everyone, as we do need to move on. So our thanks to Kevin Dunckley from HH Global. Thank you.